the top of your head, and you from, because I'm looking at this objectively as a Florida State grad, but from you from an outside perspective, did Florida State, does Florida State have a tough schedule, or what are your initial thoughts? Just judging on this from a college football perspective.
So I've not combed through all the ACC schedules yet. I
Mm,
do think that with Clemson being the standard in the conference for the past 7 or 8 years, Miami having the wherewithal, we keep saying this, to emerge at some point, and Florida State's third primary opponent is who is their
it's Syracuse, Clemson, and Miami.
yes. So I believe Florida State potentially has one of the toughest draws in regards to year, those three opponents.
Mm,
I can't say that I've really looked at the schedule in comparison to everyone else. Now, I came out, as you well know, and made this point a number of times when it was relevant that I thought Florida State by far had the toughest schedule in the ACC last year, both in conference and out of conference. I can't really say that about this schedule, although Florida LSU is difficult to match for any team in the ACC out of conference. But I got to think with Wake, Duke, Pitt, it does look like a fairly, only 7 other teams are going to play Clemson in the conference out of 14. So, there are automatically 7 teams in the conference that don't have to deal with Clemson. So I've got to think that this is, if not the toughest schedule in the conference, it's one of the toughest.
yeah, and I think you look at the schedule. I think if you were to say right now who are the favorites in the ACC as far as the favorites to make it to Charlotte in the ACC title game, I'd probably say Clemson, obviously, is number one as the defending champions in the conference. I'd probably say Florida State, and then I'd probably say North Carolina if you just want to base it right now. Looking at North Carolina's schedule for a moment, they play South Carolina, Appalachian State, and Minnesota the first 3 games. That's a rough first 3 games of the season just out of conference schedule alone if you're North Carolina. And then you look at ACC play. They got to play Miami. They have to play Florida. They have Miami. They play NC State, and they play Clemson. So there's could be 3 interesting games right there that they could easily lose 2 of those games. So I think that knocks North Carolina out. Miami, if we're looking at Miami, I think once again, if Miami plays based on their talent, Miami should be fine. Because Miami, you look their first 4 games, Miami, Texas A&M, Bethune-Cookman, and Temple. Miami, and even Georgia Tech to open ACC play. There's no reason if Miami plays on talent alone, the talent that's on Miami's roster, Miami should start the season 5-0. The way Miami has played over much of the last decade, you could argue that Miami will also be 3-2 entering that stretch where they play North Carolina and Clemson in back-to-back games. So that's going to be the question right there is if you're the ACC, if you have Clemson and Florida State as your top 2 teams, those are your 2 anchors right now in the conference. The question is going to be which team is going to step up and compete with those teams? Is it a Miami? Is it a North Carolina? Is it, you look at, we talked a little bit about Pitt. Is it a Pittsburgh team who you would say, looking at their schedule at the top of your head, they host North Carolina, they host Florida State, they don't play Miami, they don't play Clemson. As much as I hate to say it, I think Pitt might be the dark, for lack of a better term, I know they were a bowl team last season, but I think Pitt might be the dark horse team to compete for a spot in the ACC title game. Looking at their schedule right now, you got Wofford, Cincinnati, West Virginia, and Notre Dame are your non-conference games. I would say Notre Dame on the road is probably the toughest of those non-conference games. With all due respect to Cincinnati and West Virginia, I would say that. But as far as ACC play, your home schedule is North Carolina, Louisville, Florida State, and Boston College. And your road schedule is Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, Syracuse, and Duke.
I am right there with you.
Yeah.
Here's why. Clemson and Florida State are the 2 best teams in the conference until proven otherwise. Clemson is rock solid. We can have an argument as to whether they're in decline from a national elite standpoint, but just looking at the conference, and Cade Klubnik is going to have a full off-season workout, spring practice, everything as the starting quarterback to get himself ready to be a much improved player. Florida State, we saw what the Seminoles did last year, and I think that they are primed to be possibly the team that finally knocks off Clemson. I know that Clemson didn't win the conference 2 years ago, but kind of officially ends the Clemson run and takes over as the best program. Just a tremendous amount of good vibe, good atmosphere, good environment, good leadership around this team. A number of guys coming back that really are hungry, and arguably the best quarterback in the conference. Now, with North Carolina, what I like about them, of course, everybody likes Drake May, me included, tremendous quarterback. I also got to think, if Gene Chizik is worth anything as a defensive coordinator, that he's finally going to figure some things out, because they've recruited extremely well on that side of the ball and should be much better defensively. And as you mentioned, Pitt's got Phil Jurkovec coming in from Boston College, a fine quarterback who's finally going to have better talent around him and better protection at Pitt than he enjoyed at Boston College. So I would agree that those would be on two different levels, the cream of the crop. And then you've got this smattering of Louisville, NC State, really those two, in my eyes, kind of leading the pack. I have all the respect in the world and admire what Mike Elko did at Duke, as we talked about a few minutes ago, but I would think that they are going to be hard-pressed based on what you outlined with the schedule to repeat 8-4.
Yeah, North Carolina, if you look at their schedule, they start off the year with South Carolina, Appalachian State, and Minnesota, and they end the year with Duke, at Clemson, at NC State. That's a schedule that right there, just assuming they win the games in the middle, which is a schedule that includes Miami. You know, they have Virginia, Georgia Tech. They go to Pitt, and they have Campbell. I mean, obviously, you don't mess with the Campbells. No. I mean, you never want to mess with them. But, I mean, North Carolina, I feel like, is a team that has the talent, once again, to finish 9 wins, 10 wins, but also could finish 7-5 at that rate right there. Pitt, just, you know, once again, obviously, we're going with schedules. Anything can happen once the season goes on. Pitt, I think, is a team. NC State, you look at them. They've got Notre Dame at home. They've got Miami at home. They've got North Carolina at home. I mean, their toughest game on the road is probably at Duke. I'd probably argue at that point. Yeah, I mean, the rest of their games are at UConn, VMI, and Marshall in non-conference play. NC State's a team that I think could mess around, somehow win 9 games. But if they could somehow make it into the ACC title game, I think they get smacked around by either Clemson, who they will play in the regular season if they play them again in the ACC title game, or they get smacked around by Florida State. I think NC State could be the most overrated 9-win team if they play, you know, according to standards at that rate. I think, honestly, the team that I think that is going to disappoint me the most, if you just based on preseason expectations, I would probably say is going to be North Carolina, just because I think North Carolina has that absolutely tough schedule right now. Duke could also disappoint a little bit because of their schedule. Clemson, Notre Dame, NC State, Florida State, North Carolina. That's an interesting team right there. You're obviously pulling up Louisville's schedule right now with that always tough game against Murray State right there on Thursday, September 7th. You never mess with Murray State. They're obviously giving me a birthday present playing Georgia Tech on my birthday this year. Let's talk about that. I have to spend my birthday at a UM football game, a University of Miami football game. What the hell's that about? Thanks a lot.
Yeah, timing. What can I say?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I pulled up Louisville because we had a few people in the chat that think that they're a bit of a sleeper with an easy schedule.
Oh, yeah. Look at their schedule right now. Georgia Tech, Murray State, Indiana to start off the season, then Boston College at home. They could easily start 4-0 at that rate before their toughest game to start off at NC State. But after that, Notre Dame at home. You don't know what Notre Dame team is going to show up there. But let's say worst case scenario, you're 5-2 going into your open week, and then your last 5 games of the season include Virginia Tech and Virginia, both at home, Duke, Miami, and Kentucky. Yeah, that's easily they could sleepwalk to a 9-win season. Yeah, I could easily see that. And by that, we talked about we don't know what Miami team will show up by that point. That's a Miami team that heading into that Louisville game, look at their schedule, would the 4 of the 5 games before that would be Clemson, North Carolina, NC State, and Florida State. So that's a Miami team that's going to be battered and bruised when they host Louisville on November 18th. Yes, NC State. And John's 100% right. NC State is overrated almost every year. the schedule plays out very favorably for them. So that's going to be the question. Do they live up to standards, or is there going to be a game where they're going to choke? Because look at last season. They had no business beating North Carolina. I think North Carolina was a better team as a whole than NC State, but they went out and beat them in the regular season finale. So that's which NC State team is going to show up. NC State, we played much better than them, and yet they still beat us 19-17. So that's the question with NC State.